Many have wondered if the COVID-19 pandemic will bring any benefit to the environment. And if that's the case, is it okay to celebrate the bright side of things? We're seeing some of the environmental changes we wanted, but it's at the cost of the pandemic. While the associated damages are likely long-lasting, the effects on our environment are only anecdotic if we stop fighting to achieve social and climate justice. But what is climate justice? And why should it matter now more than ever? What are the challenges that different persons in the world are facing? And what can we do to build a better future together? My name is Greta Glenhill, and with my friends at UC Davis, we bring you this new mini-series on climate justice. Although the ongoing pandemic has greatly obscured any other crisis, it is important to remember that we were already experiencing climate change effects. Since the Industrial Revolution almost 2 centuries ago, on average, humans have emitted more greenhouse gases than the year before, and emissions have only declined in times of large economic crisis. So how can we achieve decreasing emissions, but with a thriving society? According to what we know now, and what climate models tell us, we have until 2030 to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to at least half of what we emitted in 2010. This presents a huge challenge. A recent study led by UC Davis Associate Professor Dr. Fran Moore indicates that we could be living firsthand in the story of the frog in the pot of hot water. Here's Fran to explain what our future may be.
The story goes that if you take a frog in cold water and gradually heat that water up, that the frog kind of never jumps out because he's just kind of so used to it, this gradual change, and can eventually boil to death. Turns out that's not true. Frogs actually do jump out. But this analogy has been used a lot for climate change. And so in this study, we were interested in using how much people talk about weather as a way to understand, to back out what people think of as normal climate conditions. And so to do this, we measured how much people talk about weather using Twitter data. And we show that what happens is, like, if you have really crazy weather in your county at that time of year, then people will talk about the weather, right? People talk about it if it's hot, they talk about it if it's cold. But if you keep having that same weird weather kind of multiple years in a row, people really stop talking about it quite quickly. And that effect is consistent with people shifting their ideas of normal quite quickly.
And this is exactly what needs to be avoided. But this is difficult because the more news, stories, and videos that there are about climate change, the more we are accustomed to hearing about environmental disasters and how bad the environment will be in the future. These stories will paralyze us and give us eco-anxiety, the distress of feeling too small for an environmental problem so big. But don't feel too depressed or anxious. We can always go to the movies or go hang out with our friends and distract ourselves so we can forget about it. But not everyone has the privilege of this. There are people constantly suffering unequal repercussions of climate change. Believe it or not, climate change is deeply ethical and political in nature. At the beginning of this video, we said that humans were responsible for burning fossil fuels and causing anthropogenic climate change. But guess what? Not all humans are equally responsible. Historically, only a handful of countries and companies have promoted the intense extraction, use, and emissions of fossil fuels that have led to the high levels of carbon dioxide that we see today. These countries have drastically increased their wealth in this process. A wealth that allows them to protect themselves against the impacts of climate change. On the other hand, the countries or communities that had least to do with fossil fuel emissions, like indigenous communities, are the ones that feel the impacts of more frequent and more intense climate-driven natural phenomena. We call this climate injustice, as those who are not responsible for climate change will be more affected than those who are. Some climate change studies have not only focused on studying future impacts, but also the distribution of these unequal impacts. For example, it has been projected that climate change will decrease the productivity of fields of corn, rice, and wheat, especially in Central and South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia. This will affect the poorest regions, and the regions that depend heavily on agriculture for survival. Now that we've taken you to the darkest side of things, we hope that you'll turn that anxiety into energy to create change. All around the world, people are taking matters into their own hands and are fighting to demand climate justice for those communities that are being most impacted by climate change. We are at a critical point where we can still change the circumstances of our future and that of the generations to come. And that's what we are going to talk about in this series on climate justice. This is Greta reporting for Planetiendo, and remember, don't be a fossil fool.